The 6:47 a.m. commuter train from Millbrook to downtown was never meant for dreams. It was a vessel of exhaustion, carrying the weight of working mothers, tired fathers, and anyone else who couldn't afford to live closer to their jobs. The vinyl seats were cracked from years of use, the windows fogged with condensation, and the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks created a lullaby that threatened to pull even the most determined passengers into unwanted sleep. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Martinez knew this train intimately. For 3 years, she had occupied the same seat in car number 4, always the third row from the front on the left side, clutching a thermos of coffee that had gone cold before she'd finished half of it. At 28, she carried herself with the particular exhaustion that comes from being solely responsible for another human being's entire world. Her dark hair was perpetually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes, while clean and pressed, showed the telltale signs of someone who shopped exclusively in discount stores and thrift shops. This particular Tuesday morning felt heavier than most. Sarah's 8-year-old daughter Emma had been up most of the night with a fever, and Sarah had spent the dark hours alternating between placing cool washcloths on her daughter's forehead and researching pediatric symptoms on her cracked phone screen. When Emma's temperature finally broke at 4 in the morning, Sarah had exactly 2 hours to shower, prepare breakfast, pack lunches, and get her daughter ready for school before catching her train to the city. The double shift at Henderson's department store awaited her. 12 hours on her feet, smiling at customers who barely acknowledged her existence, folding clothes that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and pretending that being called sales associate instead of her actual name didn't chip away at her dignity one interaction at a time. The job paid enough to keep their small apartment and put food on the table, but barely. There was no room for extras, no buffer for emergencies, and certainly no money for things like Emma's upcoming school field trip to the Science Museum. As the train pulled away from Millbrook Station, Sarah settled into her familiar seat and opened the manila envelope that contained her second job. 3 nights a week after her shifts at Henderson's, she worked as a freelance bookkeeper for small businesses, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table while Emma slept. The work was tedious and the pay modest, but it was the only way she could imagine eventually saving enough money to return to college and finish the accounting degree she'd abandoned when Emma was born. The train car gradually filled with its usual passengers. There was Mrs. Chun, the elderly woman who always knitted during the 40-minute journey to the city. Behind her sat Robert, a construction worker who read romance novels with the covers turned inward, thinking no one would notice. Near the back, a group of nurses from Millbrook General Hospital dozed against each other, their scrubs wrinkled from overnight shifts. But this morning, something was different. A man in an expensive charcoal suit had taken the seat directly across the aisle from Sarah's usual spot. She noticed him immediately because he was so clearly out of place among the train's typical passengers. His suit was tailored perfectly, his shoes were Italian leather, and his briefcase looked like it cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of confident posture that came from never having to worry about whether his debit card would be declined at the grocery store. What struck Sarah most was how tired he looked. Despite his expensive appearance, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders carried a tension that even the finest tailoring couldn't disguise. He stared out the window with the same hollow expression Sarah recognized in her own reflection on particularly difficult mornings. The train lurched as it rounded a curve, and Sarah's manila envelope slipped from her lap, spilling invoices and receipts across the narrow aisle. She scrambled to collect the papers, her cheeks burning with embarrassment as she crawled partially into the aisle to retrieve documents that had scattered near the expensive man's feet. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. gathering the papers as quickly as possible while trying to avoid drawing more attention to herself. The man leaned down and handed her several invoices that had landed near his briefcase. "No need to apologize," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "These trains weren't designed for organization." Sarah looked up to thank him and found herself caught off guard by his eyes. They were a warm brown, kind in a way that seemed almost incongruous with his corporate appearance. For just a moment, she forgot about her embarrassment and simply met his gaze. "Thank you," she managed, clutching the papers to her chest. "You're welcome, Sarah," he replied, then paused, looking slightly confused. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I said your name." "I don't think we've met." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She was certain she'd never seen this man before, yet something about him seemed familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. "No, we haven't met," she said slowly. "I'm Sarah Martinez." "David Chun," he said, extending his hand. "And I apologize for the presumption with your name. You just remind me of someone." Sarah shook his hand, noting how soft it was compared to her own work-roughened palms. "It's fine. Thank you again for helping with the papers." As she settled back into her seat, organizing her bookkeeping work, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was significant in some way she didn't understand. David Chun had returned to staring out the window, but she caught him glancing in her direction several times during the next few minutes. The train continued its journey through the industrial outskirts of the city, passing abandoned factories and new construction sites. Sarah tried to focus on the invoices in her lap, but her exhaustion was catching up with her. The fever interrupted. Night with Emma, combined with the early morning routine, had left her feeling like she was moving through thick fog. Her eyelids grew heavy as she attempted to reconcile a set of particularly confusing expense reports. The gentle swaying of the train car, combined with the rhythmic sound of wheels on tracks, created a hypnotic effect that her tired mind couldn't resist. She fought against the drowsiness, knowing she needed to complete at least 3 client files during the commute, but her body was betraying her. "You should rest," came David's voice from across the aisle. "You look exhausted." Sarah's eyes snapped open. She hadn't realized she'd been nodding off. "I can't," she said, gesturing to the papers in her lap. "I have work to finish." "At 7 in the morning?" David asked, his tone curious rather than judgmental. "Second job," Sarah explained, then immediately wondered why she was sharing personal information with a stranger. "I do bookkeeping for small businesses. The only time I have to work on it is during the commute." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's admirable. What's your primary job?" "Sales associate at Henderson's department store," Sarah said, then added, with a wry smile, "though they prefer we call ourselves customer experience specialists." "Ah," David said, with what might have been a hint of recognition. "Henderson's, I know it well." Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more closely. "Do you shop there?" "In a manner of speaking," David replied, but didn't elaborate. Instead, he asked, "Do you enjoy the work?" Sarah almost laughed. "I enjoy being able to pay rent and feed my daughter. The work itself is what it is." "Your daughter," David said, and again Sarah noticed that strange note of familiarity in his voice. "How old is she?" 8, Sarah said, pulling out her phone to show him Emma's school picture. "Her name is Emma." David studied the photo for a long moment, and Sarah could have sworn she saw his hands tremble slightly. "She's beautiful," he said finally. "She has your eyes." "Everyone says that," Sarah agreed, tucking the phone away. "Though she definitely has her father's stubborn streak." "Is her father involved?" David asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's okay," Sarah said, though she usually avoided discussing Emma's father with strangers. "He's not in the picture." "Hasn't been since she was born?" David's expression darkened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Raising a child alone must be incredibly difficult." It has its challenges, Sarah admitted. But Emma's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'd do anything for her. I'm sure you would, David said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah study his face more carefully. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of her appearance. The train began to slow as it approached the next station, and several passengers gathered their belongings to disembark. Sarah glanced at her watch and realized she still had 20 minutes before reaching downtown. The car had grown quieter with fewer passengers, and the gentle rocking motion was making her drowsiness even more pronounced. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I really should finish this work, she said, more to herself than to David, but her voice lacked conviction. The work will be there when you wake up, David said. When's the last time you got a full night's sleep? Sarah couldn't remember. Between Emma's needs, her 2 jobs, and the constant worry about making ends meet, restful sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. It's been a while, she admitted. Close your eyes, David said gently. I'll make sure you don't miss. Stop. Sarah wanted to protest, but her exhaustion was overwhelming. The papers in her lap seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, and her eyelids felt like they were made of concrete. I can't sleep on strangers, she mumbled, even as her eyes began to close. You're not sleeping on a stranger, David said, his voice taking on an odd quality. You're sleeping on someone who cares about you. The words should have alarmed Sarah, should have made her sit up and demand an explanation, but instead they wrapped around her like a warm blanket. There was something in David's voice that reminded her of safety, of being protected, of a time when she wasn't responsible for everything and everyone. Her head began to nod forward, and she jerked awake several times, trying to maintain her composure. But the exhaustion was too powerful, and eventually, her body made the decision her mind couldn't. She slumped sideways, her head coming to rest against David's shoulder. She should have been mortified, should have apologized profusely and moved back to her own seat. Instead, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if this was exactly where she was supposed to be. David's shoulder was solid and warm beneath her cheek, and she could smell his cologne, expensive but not overwhelming, mixed with something else, something that reminded her of home in a way she couldn't quite identify. Rest now, David whispered, his hand coming up to gently stroke her hair. You're safe. And for the first time in years, Sarah truly believed it. The constant tension she carried in her shoulders began to ease, and the worried thoughts that usually circled her mind like sharks grew quiet. She was vaguely aware of the train continuing its journey, of other passengers getting on and off, of David's steady breathing beneath her ear, but it all seemed to happen at a great distance. She dreamed of Emma, but not the usual anxiety dreams. About being late for school pickup or not having enough money for groceries. Instead, she dreamed of Emma laughing and running through green fields, her dark hair streaming behind her as she chased butterflies. In the dream, Emma was calling to her, but not with the urgent need that usually characterized their interactions. This was joy, pure and simple, the sound of a child who felt completely secure in her world. The dream shifted, and Sarah found herself in a kitchen that wasn't her cramped apartment kitchen. This one was large and bright, with windows that looked out onto rolling hills. She was cooking something that smelled wonderful, and she could hear Emma's laughter coming from another room. There was a sense of peace in the dream, of having enough time, enough money, enough of everything that mattered. When Sarah began to wake, it was gradual, like surfacing from deep water. She became aware first of warmth, then of movement, then of the absence of the train's familiar sounds. Instead of the clacking of wheels on tracks, she heard birds singing and the distant lowing of cattle. Instead of the stuffy air of the commuter train, she breathed in the clean scent of grass and earth. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself looking at a ceiling she didn't recognize. It was high and beamed with rich wood, painted white and decorated with rustic light fixtures. She was lying on a comfortable couch in what appeared to be a spacious living room, covered with a soft quilt that smelled like lavender and sunshine. Sarah sat up quickly, her heart racing as she tried to orient herself. The room was beautiful, decorated in warm earth tones with comfortable furniture and family photographs covering every surface. Through large windows, she could see rolling pastures dotted with horses and cattle, and in the distance, mountains that definitely weren't visible from anywhere near her usual train route. "You're awake," came David's voice from across the room. Sarah spun around to find him sitting in an armchair, still wearing his expensive suit, but looking somehow different in this rustic setting. He was holding a cup of coffee and watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Where am I?" Sarah asked, her voice coming out as a croak. "What happened to the train?" "You're at Willow Creek Ranch," David said calmly. "About 2 hours outside the city. You've been sleeping for most of the day." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. "That's impossible. I was on the train to work. I have to be at Henderson's by 9. Emma needs to be picked up from school at 3:15. She fumbled for her phone and found it dead." "What time is it? How did I get here?" "It's almost 4 in the afternoon," David said, setting down his coffee cup. "And as for how you got here, that's a longer story." 4 in the afternoon? Sarah's voice rose to near panic. "I missed my entire shift. I'll be fired. And Emma, oh God, Emma, will be waiting at school, and I won't be there, and they'll call social services and Emma is fine." David interrupted gently. "She's here." Sarah stopped mid-sentence, staring at him. "What do you mean, she's here?" "She's out in the barn with Miguel, our ranch manager. She's been helping feed the horses. She seems to love animals." "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "Emma was at school, in Millbrook. How could she possibly be here?" David stood up and walked to the window, gesturing for Sarah to join him. With trembling legs, she crossed the room and looked out. There, in the distance, she could see a small figure in a familiar pink jacket running between the barn and a fenced pasture. Even from this distance, she could recognize Emma's distinctive way of moving, the way she bounced on her toes when she was excited. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This doesn't make sense. I fell asleep on the train. I was supposed to wake up downtown. I was supposed to go to work." "Sometimes," David said quietly, "life takes us where we need to be instead of where we plan to go." Sarah turned to stare at him, really seeing him for the first time since waking up. Without the context of the commuter train, he looked different. More relaxed, but also more substantial somehow, as if this place gave him a weight and presence he hadn't possessed in the confined space of the train car. "Who are you?" she asked. "Really?" David was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the scene outside the window where Emma was now laughing at something Miguel was showing her. "My name is David Chun," he said finally. "I'm the majority owner of Henderson's department store, among other things. But more importantly, I'm Emma's father." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She staggered backward, gripping the window frame for support. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Emma's father left before she was born. I never even told him I was pregnant." "You tried to tell me," David said, turning to face her. "You called the corporate office 3 times. Each time, you were told I was unavailable. The 4th time, you were told I'd left instructions that I didn't want to be contacted regarding personal matters." Sarah's knees gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. "The phone calls," she whispered. "I remember the phone calls. But they said you didn't want to know." "I never received those messages," David said, his voice heavy with regret. My assistant at the time, Gloria Morrison, had very specific ideas about what kinds of calls I should and shouldn't receive. She took it upon herself to filter out what she considered distractions. 9 years, Sarah said, her voice hollow. 9 years you've known Emma existed and you never tried to contact us? I only found out about Emma 6 months ago, David said, sitting down across from her. Gloria retired last year, and when I was cleaning out her files, I found a folder labeled Personal Matters Handled. Inside were records of your calls, notes about your pregnancy, and a private investigator's report about Emma's birth. Sarah stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling her. A private investigator? Gloria hired him to verify your claims, David explained. She wanted to make sure you weren't lying about the pregnancy. When he confirmed that you'd given birth to a daughter, she filed the report away and never told me about it. Why? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. David's expression grew pained. Because 6 months before Emma was born, I'd gotten engaged to someone else. Someone Gloria thought was more appropriate for a man in my position. She was protecting what she saw as my best interests. You were engaged, Sarah repeated numbly. I was young and stupid and thought I knew what I wanted, David said. Melissa came from the right family, moved in the right circles, understood the business world. On paper, she was perfect. What happened to her? We got married, David said simply. It lasted 3 years, no children. She decided she preferred the lifestyle my money could provide without having to deal with me personally. The divorce was finalized 4 years ago. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the flood of information. So when you found out about Emma 6 months ago, why didn't you contact us then? I did, David said. I hired a different private investigator to find you. I learned about your jobs, her apartment, your struggles. I learned that you were working yourself to death, trying to provide for our daughter while I was living in a mansion, completely unaware that she existed. You've been watching us, Sarah said, and she wasn't sure if she felt violated or protected. I've been trying to figure out how to approach you, David corrected. How do you tell someone that you're the father of their child when they've believed for 9 years that you abandoned them? How do you explain that you never knew, that you would have been there if you'd known? You could have just called, Sarah said weakly. I tried, David said. I called your apartment 12 times. You never answered. I went to Henderson's twice, but you were always with customers, and I lost my nerve. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to buy my way into Emma's life, or that you'd think I was just feeling guilty and would disappear again once the novelty wore off. So instead you, orchestrated this whole thing? David looked uncomfortable. I started taking the train from Millbrook to downtown 3 weeks ago. I rented a small apartment there just so I could ride the same train you took to work. I was hoping I'd find a way to approach you naturally, to maybe start a conversation that would lead to me being able to explain. You've been stalking me for 3 weeks, Sarah said, her voice rising. I've been trying to find the courage to talk to you for 3 weeks, David countered. This morning, when you fell asleep on my shoulder, I saw an opportunity. I knew you were exhausted. I knew you were struggling, and I thought maybe if I could show you a different life, a better life, you might be willing to listen to what I had to say. So you kidnapped me and my daughter? I brought you home, David said firmly. To the ranch that should have been Emma's home from the beginning. To the life you both should have had if my assistant hadn't decided to play God with other people's lives. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is insane. You can't just take people from their lives because you feel guilty about the past. I have responsibilities. I have jobs. I have bills to pay. What if you didn't have to worry about those things anymore? David asked quietly. Everyone has to worry about those things, Sarah snapped. That's what being an adult means. Not everyone, David said. Sarah, I'm worth approximately $400 million. Emma is my daughter. That makes her my heir. You're the mother of my child, which makes you family. You don't have to struggle anymore. Neither of you do." Sarah stopped pacing and stared at him. $400 million? Give or take, David said with a slight smile. I own Henderson's, but that's just one part of a much larger business empire. Real estate, technology, manufacturing. Emma will inherit all of it someday. I don't want your money, Sarah said. But even as she said it, she thought about Emma's upcoming field trip, about the way her daughter's shoes were wearing thin, about the constant anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck. It's not about what you want, David said gently. It's about what Emma deserves. She's my daughter, Sarah. She should have the best of everything. Private schools, college tuition, a secure future. She should never have to worry about weather. There's enough money for food or rent or medical bills. She's happy, Sarah said defensively. We have a good life. You have a hard life, David corrected. There's a difference. You're working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. You're exhausted all the time. You're sacrificing your own dreams and goals just to survive. That's not living, Sarah. That's just existing. Before Sarah could respond, the front door burst open and Emma came running in, her cheeks flushed with excitement and her eyes bright with joy. Mom! She called out, then stopped short when she saw Sarah's expression. Are you okay? You look upset. Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma into a fierce hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. I'm fine, sweetheart. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Hurt? Emma pulled back with a puzzled expression. Why would I be hurt? This place is amazing. Miguel showed me how to brush the horses. And there's a kitten in the barn that doesn't have a name yet. And did you know that cows are actually really smart? And the mountains are so pretty. And my room has a window that looks right out at them. Your room? Sarah looked up at David, who was watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. David said I could pick any room I wanted. Emma continued excitedly. I picked the one with the yellow walls because it reminds me of sunshine. He said, I could decorate it however I want. Can we stay here forever, Mom, please? Sarah felt her heart breaking. Emma had never had her own room before. In their small apartment, she slept on a daybed in the living room, her clothes stored in a dresser that also served as Sarah's desk. The idea of Emma having her own space, her own window with a view of mountains, was almost too much to bear. Sweetheart, Sarah said carefully, this isn't our house. We're just visiting. But David said, Emma began, then stopped and looked between her mother and David. Is David my daddy? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sarah felt her throat close up as she looked at her daughter's hopeful expression. Emma had asked about her father before, but Sarah had always deflected, saying only that he wasn't able to be part of their lives. Emma, Sarah said slowly, we need to talk about some grown-up things. But first, can you tell me how you got here? Don't you remember being at school this morning? Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. I remember getting to school, she said slowly. But then Mrs. Peterson said there was a family emergency and someone was picking me up. David was there, and he said you were sick and needed to rest, and that we were going somewhere safe where you could get better. Sarah's eyes blazed as she looked at David. You took her out of school? You lied to her teachers? I told them I was Emma's father and that there was a family situation that required immediate attention, David said calmly. I showed them identification and signed the necessary forms. You had no right, Sarah said, her voice shaking. With anger, no right at all. I had every right, David replied, his voice growing firmer. I'm her father, Sarah. I know that's hard for you to accept after all these years, but it's the truth. I have legal rights where Emma is concerned. Legal rights? Sarah stood up, her hands clenched into fists. You abandoned us. I never knew about you. David shot back, his own composure finally cracking. I never had the chance to abandon you because I never knew you existed. Emma looked back and forth between them, her earlier excitement fading into confusion and fear. Why are you fighting? She asked in a small voice. Did I do something wrong? Both adults immediately stopped arguing, their attention focusing on the child who was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. Oh, sweetheart, no, Sarah said, kneeling down again and taking Emma's hands. You didn't do anything wrong. The grown-ups are just trying to figure some things out. Are you going to take me away from here? Emma asked, and Sarah was surprised to hear disappointment in her daughter's voice. I really like it here. Miguel said he'd teach me how to ride a horse tomorrow. And there's a creek where we can look for frogs. And the kitchen has a window seat where you can read books. Sarah felt torn between her anger at David and her desire to give Emma everything she'd ever dreamed of. I don't know, baby, she said honestly. We need to have some conversations first. Can I go finish helping Miguel with the horses while you talk? Emma asked. He said the horses need to be fed before dark, and I promised I'd help. Sarah looked at David, who nodded. Miguel is very trustworthy, he said. She'd be perfectly safe. Okay, Sarah agreed reluctantly. But stay where Miguel can see you, and come back when he's done with the horses. I will, Emma said, her enthusiasm returning. She hugged Sarah tightly then, to Sarah's surprise, ran over and hugged David too. Thank you for bringing us here, she said to him. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. After Emma left, silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah sank back into her chair, suddenly feeling exhausted all over again. She's never had a yard to play in, she said quietly, or animals to pet, or her own room. She's never even seen mountains before. She could have all of this, David said gently. Permanently, this could be her life. At what cost? Sarah asked, what do you want from us, David? Really? David sat down across from her again, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I want the chance to be Emma's father, he said. I want to give her the childhood she should have had from the beginning. I want to make sure she never has to worry about money or security, or whether she'd be able to pursue her dreams. And what about me? Sarah asked. Where do I fit into this fantasy? Wherever you want to fit, David said. I'm not trying to take Emma away from you, Sarah. You're an incredible mother. She's lucky to have you. But I want to be part of her life too. I want to be part of both your lives. As what? Sarah pressed. An ex-boyfriend who pays child support? A distant father who shows up for birthdays and holidays? As whatever you'll let me be, David said, his voice soft. I know I don't have the right to ask for more than that. I know I missed the first 8 years of Emma's life, and I know that's not entirely my fault, but it's still a fact. I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future better. Sarah looked around the comfortable room, then out the window at Emma, who was laughing, as she helped Miguel carry a bucket of feed. This is all overwhelming, she said. This morning I was Sarah Martinez, single mother struggling to make ends meet. Now you're telling me I'm the mother of a millionaire's child, and everything I thought I knew about the past is wrong. I know it's a lot to process, David said. That's why I brought you here. I thought maybe if you could see what life could be like, if you could see Emma happy and free from worry, it might make the transition easier. Transition? Sarah looked at him sharply. You're assuming I'm going to agree to this. I'm hoping you will, David corrected, for Emma's sake. Don't, Sarah said firmly. Don't make this about what's best for Emma. I've been making decisions about what's best for Emma for 8 years. I think I know my daughter better than you do. You're absolutely right, David said, surprising her. You do know her better than I do. But Sarah, in the few hours I've spent with her today, I've learned that she's curious and kind and brave and smart. She's also never been on a horse, never seen a mountain up close, never had a room of her own, and never had a pet. Those aren't criticisms of you as a mother. They're just facts about what poverty takes away from children. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. I've done the best I could. I know you have, David said gently. And your best has been extraordinary. Emma is a wonderful child, and that's because of you. But what if you didn't have to do it alone anymore? What if you had help? What if you had resources? What if you could focus on being Emma's mother instead of working 2 jobs just to survive? And what would you get out of it? Sarah asked. Nobody does something like this without wanting something in return. David was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains visible through the window. I'd get to know my daughter, he said finally. I'd get to be there for her first horseback ride, her first day at a new school, her first broken heart. I'd get to help her with homework and teach her about business and walk her down the aisle someday, if she wants me to. He paused, then added more quietly, and maybe I'd get to fall in love with her mother if she'd let me. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. David, she began, but he held up a hand. I know that's presumptuous, he said. I know you have every reason to be angry with me, even if the abandonment wasn't intentional. I know you've built a life without me, and maybe you don't want or need me in it. But Sarah, I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night 9 years ago. Finding out about Emma just gave me an excuse to admit that to myself. Sarah stared at him, remembering suddenly the night they'd met. It had been at a company party for Henderson's employees. She'd been working there for only a few months, and she'd been shocked when she'd been invited to the executive reception. David had been there as the owner's son, though she hadn't known that at the time. She'd thought he was just another executive. Charming and handsome and surprisingly easy to talk to. They'd spent the entire evening together, talking about everything and nothing. He'd told her about his dreams of expanding the business, of making it more than just a department store. She'd told him about her plans to finish college, to maybe start her own business someday. The conversation had flowed so naturally that she'd felt like she'd known him forever. One thing had led to another, and they'd spent the night together. It had been magical, perfect, the kind of night that existed more in romance novels than in real life. When she'd woken up the next morning, David had been gone, but he'd left a note saying he'd had a wonderful time and hoped to see her again soon, but he never called. And when Sarah had tried to reach him, she'd been told he was unavailable. When she'd discovered she was pregnant, her attempts to contact him had been rebuffed. Eventually she'd given up, assuming he'd gotten what he wanted and moved on. I remember that night, she said softly. I remember how you made me feel. Like I was the most interesting person in the room. You were, David said. You still are. But you left, Sarah said, the old hurt creeping into her voice. You left without saying goodbye. I had an early flight to Chicago, David explained. A business emergency. I thought I'd see you at work on Monday, but when I got back from Chicago, you weren't there anymore. They told me you'd quit. I quit because I was pregnant and morning sickness was making it impossible to work retail, Sarah said. I was throwing up every morning and I couldn't handle the smell of the perfume. Counter. I wish I'd known, David said. I wish I'd tried harder to find you. But you didn't, Sarah said. And I built a life without you. Emma and I have been fine on our own. Fine isn't the same as happy, David said gently. Fine, isn't they? Same as thriving. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. She'd plugged it into charge, and now it was coming back to life with a series of notifications. Text messages from her supervisor at Henderson's, asking where she was. Voicemails from Emma Sarah's phone continued buzzing with increasingly frantic. Messages from her life back in Millbrook. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her like a wave. She had missed an entire day of work without calling in, something that could easily cost her the job she desperately needed. Her landlord, Mr. Peterson, would be expecting rent in 3 days, and her checking account had exactly $47.32 in it. "I need to go back," she said abruptly, standing up and looking around for her purse. "I need to call my supervisor and explain. Maybe if I tell them there was a family emergency." "Sarah, wait," David said, but she was already moving toward the door. "Where are my things? My purse, my work clothes? I need to get back to the city tonight. I have to work tomorrow or I'll lose my job, and Emma has school. And I can't just disappear from my life because you've decided you want to play father." "Your belongings are upstairs in the guest room," David said calmly. "But Sarah, please. Sit down. Let's talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" Sarah spun around to face him, her eyes blazing. "There's nothing rational about this situation. You kidnapped me and my daughter because you feel guilty about missing 8 years of her life. That's not rational, David. That's delusional." "I didn't kidnap you," David said, his own voice rising slightly. "I brought you somewhere safe where we could have this conversation without the pressures of your daily survival interfering with your ability to think clearly." "My daily survival is my life," Sarah shot back. "It's not something that interferes with thinking clearly. It's what keeps Emma and me housed and fed and alive. You can't just wave your hand and make those responsibilities disappear because you have money." "Actually, I can," David said quietly. "That's exactly what money does, Sarah. It removes the barriers that keep people from living the lives they want to live." Sarah stared at him, feeling a familiar rage building in her chest. It was the same anger she felt when wealthy customers at Henderson's complained about prices that represented her grocery budget for a week, or when Emma's classmates talked casually about vacations and activities that were completely out of reach for them. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said through gritted teeth. "You think poverty is just an inconvenience that can be solved with a checkbook. You think 8 years of struggle and sacrifice and doing without can just be erased because you suddenly want to be involved." "That's not what I think at all," David replied, but Sarah wasn't finished. "Do you know what Emma's favorite meal is?" she continued, her voice getting louder. "Pancakes for dinner. Do you know why? Because pancakes are cheap and filling, and I can make them taste special by putting faces on them with blueberries." "Do you know what she asks for every Christmas? Not toys or games or clothes. She asks for us to be able to keep the heat on all winter without me having to choose between heating bills and groceries." David's face had gone pale, but Sarah was beyond caring about his comfort. "Do you know what she told me last week? She told me she wants to be a doctor when she grows up so she can take care of me when I'm old, because she's noticed that I'm always tired and my back hurts from standing all day. 8 years old, and she's already planning her life around taking care of me because she can see how hard I'm working just to keep us afloat." "Sarah," David said softly, but she wasn't done. "So don't you dare tell me that money just removes barriers. Money creates barriers too. It creates a wall between people who have it and people who don't. It makes people like you think that people like me are just problems to be solved, instead of human beings who have built meaningful lives despite having limited resources." The room fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's heavy breathing. Through the window, they could see Emma still playing with Miguel in the distance, completely unaware of the conversation happening inside. David sat down heavily in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm sorry." "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry." Sarah blinked, surprised by the admission. She had expected him to argue, to defend his position, to tell her she was being dramatic or unreasonable. "I've been thinking about this situation from my perspective," David continued. "From the perspective of someone who has always had money, who has never had to worry about basic necessities. I was thinking about what I could give you and Emma not about what I might be taking away. Sarah sat down slowly, her anger deflating, slightly in the face of his unexpected humility. I've been living with the guilt of missing Emma's first 8 years for 6 months now, David said. Every night, I've gone to bed thinking about birthday parties I wasn't there for, first steps I didn't see, scraped knees I didn't bandage. I've been so focused on trying to make up for lost time that I didn't stop to consider that maybe you and Emma don't need me to make up for anything. We don't need you to rescue us, Sarah said quietly. We're not victims, David. We're survivors. There's a difference. I'm beginning to understand that, David replied. But Sarah, I still want to be part of Emma's life. I still want to be her father, if you'll let me. I just need to figure out how to do that without destroying the life you've built for her. Sarah looked out the window at Emma, who was now sitting on a fence post while Miguel showed her something in his hands. Her daughter's face was lit up with wonder, and Sarah realized she hadn't seen Emma look that carefree in months. She's happy here, Sarah said reluctantly. She is, David agreed. But she's happy because she's with you. The setting is just a bonus. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke. Again, if I were to consider letting you be part of Emma's life, she said slowly, what would that look like? Practically speaking. David leaned forward, his expression cautious but hopeful. Whatever you're comfortable with. Weekend visits, maybe. Or I could come to Millbrook sometimes. I could help with expenses, make sure Emma has everything she needs for school and activities. And what about your expectations? Sarah asked. What do you want from Emma? I want to know her, David said simply. I want to hear about her day at school and help her with homework. I want to take her to movies and teach her things and be someone she can count on. I want to be her dad. Being a dad isn't just about the fun stuff, Sarah warned. It's also about staying up all night when she has a fever, and helping her practice spelling words for the 10th time, and dealing with tantrums and bad moods and all the unglamorous parts of raising a child. I know, David said. Or at least, I think I know. I want all of it, Sarah. The good and the bad and the boring and the difficult. I want to be a real father, not just someone who shows up for special occasions. Sarah studied his face, trying to gauge his sincerity. And what happens when the novelty wears off? When being a father turns out to be harder than you expected? What happens when Emma disappoints you, or when she goes through a phase where she doesn't want to spend time with you? Then I figure it out, David said. The same way you've been figuring it out for 8 years. I stick around and I do the work and I earn her trust and her love. Her love isn't something you can earn, Sarah said. It's something she gives freely, and it's something that comes with tremendous responsibility. If you hurt her, David, if you decide this whole father thing is too complicated, and you disappear from her life, it will destroy her. I won't disappear, David said firmly. I swear to you, Sarah, I will not disappear from Emma's life once I'm in it. How can you promise that? Sarah asked. How can anyone promise that? Because I've already missed 8 years, David said. I've already lived with the regret of not being there. I know what it feels like to wonder every day what my daughter is doing, whether she's happy, whether she's safe. I never want to feel that way again. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. It's not just about you, though. It's about Emma. She's never had a father figure in her life. She's going to have expectations and fantasies about what having a dad means. What if you can't live up to those expectations? Then I'll fail, David said. And I'll try harder. And if I fail again, I'll keep trying. That's what parents do, isn't it? They try and fail and try again. And hopefully they get it right more often than they get it wrong. Before Sarah could respond, the front door opened and Emma came bounding in, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air and her eyes bright with excitement. Mom, you have to come see the baby goats, she exclaimed, grabbing Sarah's hand. They're so tiny and soft, and one of them tried to eat my shoelaces. Miguel says they think everything is food when they're little. Sarah looked down at her daughter's eager face and felt her heart soften. Baby goats? 3 of them, Emma said, bouncing on her toes. And Miguel says tomorrow we can help bottle feed them if we're still here. We are still here tomorrow, aren't we? Please say we're still here tomorrow. Sarah glanced at David, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of longing and hope on his face. I don't know yet, sweetheart. David and I are still talking about some important things. Emma's face fell slightly. Important grown-up things? Yes, Sarah said gently. Important grown-up things that affect you too. Emma looked between her mother and David with the intuitive understanding that children often possess about adult situations. Are you fighting about me? We're not fighting, David said, speaking directly to Emma for the first time since she'd come inside. We're just trying to figure out the best way for all of us to be happy. I'm already happy, Emma said simply. I like it here. I like Miguel and the animals and my room with the yellow walls. I like that there's so much space and quiet. At home, Mrs. Rodriguez's TV is always too loud and the baby upstairs cries all night. Sarah felt a pang at Emma's casual mention of the difficulties of their living situation. She had tried so hard to shield Emma from the reality of their cramped apartment and noisy neighbors, but clearly her daughter was more aware of their circumstances than she had realized. But I like home too, Emma continued quickly, apparently sensing her mother's distress. I like our apartment and my school and my friends. I just also like it here. What if you could have both? David asked carefully. What if you could live here sometimes and live in Millbrook sometimes? Emma's eyes widened. Really? That's something people can do? Some people can, David said. If the grown-ups can figure out how to make it work. Emma looked at Sarah with hopeful eyes. Could we try it, Mom? Just to see if we like it? Sarah felt trapped between her daughter's obvious happiness and her own fear of letting David into their lives in such a significant way. It's complicated. Baby, there are a lot of things to think about. Like what? Emma asked with the directness that only children could manage. Sarah looked at David, silently asking for help with the conversation. He seemed to understand her dilemma. Well, David said, sitting forward so he was at Emma's eye level, your mom has a job in the city that she needs to think about. And you have school and friends in Millbrook. If you spent time here, we'd need to figure out things like where you would go to school and how you would see your friends. There's a school here? Emma asked. There's a very good school about 20 minutes away, David said. It's smaller than your school in Millbrook, but they have a wonderful art program and a science lab, and even a stable where students can learn to care for horses. Horses at school? Emma's voice was filled with wonder. Some schools are different from others, Sarah explained, though she was privately amazed by the idea of a school with its own stable. Some schools have more resources than others. Like more money? Emma asked with a blunt understanding of a child who had learned early that money affected most aspects of life. Yes, Sarah said, appreciating her daughter's directness. Like more money, Emma nodded thoughtfully. David has a lot of money, doesn't he? Yes, David said simply. I do. Are you rich? Emma asked. Yes, David said again. I'm rich. Emma considered this information seriously. Is that why you can have a ranch with horses and baby goats? It's one of the reasons, David agreed. And if you're my daddy, does that mean I'm rich too? The question hung in the air, and Sarah realized that Emma had grasped the implications of the situation with startling clarity. It means you would have access to more resources than you have now, David said carefully. It means you would never have to worry about having enough food or a safe place to live or being able to go to college someday. Emma looked at Sarah. Is David my daddy? Sarah felt her throat close up. This was the moment she had been dreading. The moment when she would have to explain to Emma that everything she thought she knew about her family was about to change. "Yes," she said quietly, "David is your father." Emma's eyes widened, and she looked back and forth between Sarah and David, as if seeing them both for the first time. "Really?" "Really," Sarah confirmed. "But why wasn't he around before?" Emma asked with the logical directness of childhood. "Because I didn't know about you," David said gently. "I didn't know your mom was going to have a baby. If I had known, I would have been there from the very beginning." Emma absorbed this information with the same serious consideration she had given to the discussion about money. "And now you want to be my daddy?" "More than anything," David said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma walked over to David and stood directly in front of him, studying his face with intense concentration. "You have nice eyes," she said finally. "They're kind eyes." "Thank you," David said softly. "And you smell good. Like expensive soap." Despite the tension in the room, Sarah had to suppress a smile at Emma's matter-of-fact observations. "Mom works really hard," Emma continued, still studying David. "She gets tired a lot, and sometimes her feet hurt from standing at work all day. If you're my daddy, will you help take care of her too?" Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at her daughter's instinctive protectiveness. "I would like to," David sighed, glancing at Sarah. "If she let me." Emma nodded approvingly. "Good, because moms need taking care of too, even when they pretend they don't." The simple wisdom of her daughter's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. When had Emma become so aware of her struggles? When had her 8-year-old daughter started worrying about taking care of her? "Emma," Sarah said, kneeling down beside her daughter, "you don't need to worry about taking care of me. I'm the grown-up. It's my job to take care of you." "I know," Emma said, putting her small arms around Sarah's neck, "but I love you, so I want to help take care of you too." Sarah held her daughter tightly, overwhelmed by the depth of love and maturity in such a small person. Over Emma's shoulder, she saw David watching them with an expression of profound longing. "Can I hug David too?" Emma asked, pulling back from Sarah. "Since he's my daddy?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Emma walked over to David and held out her arms. He lifted her up gently, and she wrapped her arms around his neck in the same unconscious gesture of affection she had just shown Sarah. "You're bigger than I thought a daddy would be," Emma said, settling comfortably in David's arms. "You're more wonderful than I ever imagined a daughter would be," David replied, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah watched them together and felt something inside her chest begin to crack. This was what Emma had been missing. Not just financial security or material possessions, but this sense of being cherished by someone other than her mother. Emma had never had anyone else to turn to, never had another adult who was completely devoted to her well-being. "I'm hungry," Emma announced, as if the emotional revelations of the afternoon had worked up her appetite. "Well, let's fix that," David said, setting her down. "Miguel's wife Rosa left dinner for us in the kitchen. She makes the best enchiladas you've ever tasted." "Better than the ones from Taco Tuesday at school?" Emma asked skeptically. "Much better," David assured her. As they made their way to the kitchen, Emma slipped her hand into David's with the easy acceptance of childhood. Sarah followed behind them, feeling like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with copper pots hanging from hooks and fresh herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. A covered casserole dish sat on the counter, along with a basket of fresh tortillas and a bowl of salad. "Rosa always cooks for an army," David explained, uncovering the enchiladas. "She says you never know who might need feeding." Emma climbed onto a bar stool at the kitchen island, swinging her legs as she watched David serve the food. "Does Rosa live here too?" "She and Miguel have a house about a mile down the road," David said. "They've been working on the ranch for 15 years. Rosa basically runs the household, and Miguel manages all the animals and the land. So you have a family here, Emma observed. I do, David agreed. And now I have an even bigger family. They ate dinner as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Emma had never seen from their apartment windows. The food was delicious, better than anything Sarah had tasted in years, and for a few minutes she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to live this way regularly. Tomorrow is Saturday, Emma said as she finished her second helping of enchiladas. Do I have to go to school? No school on Saturday, Sarah said automatically, then realized she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Can we stay here tomorrow? Emma asked, looking hopefully between Sarah and David. Miguel said he'd teach me to ride a horse, and I want to name the baby goats, and I want to see if there really are frogs in the creek. Sarah looked at David, who was clearly trying not to influence Emma's request with his expression. We'll see, she said finally. That usually means no, Emma said with the resignation of a child who had learned to interpret adult responses. That usually means I need time to think, Sarah corrected gently. After dinner, David showed them around the rest of the house. It was even more impressive than Sarah had initially realized, with 5 bedrooms, a library, a game room, and a sunroom that looked out over the pastures. Emma's chosen bedroom was indeed painted sunshine yellow, with a window seat that looked out at the mountains and a built-in desk that was perfect for homework. There's a computer in the library if you need to do research for school, David told Emma. And the internet here is much faster than what you probably have in town. Emma nodded seriously, as if fast internet was a crucial consideration for an 8-year-old. As they prepared Emma for bed, Sarah was struck by how normal the routine felt despite the extraordinary circumstances. Emma brushed her teeth in a bathroom that was larger than their entire apartment, but she still insisted on Sarah reading her a bedtime story and tucking her in just the way she did at home. Mom, Emma said as Sarah was about to turn off the light, are you going to marry David? The question caught Sarah completely off guard. What makes you ask that? Well, he's my daddy and you're my mommy, and in books the mommies and daddies are usually married, Emma explained with childlike logic. Real life is more complicated than books sometimes, Sarah said carefully. David and I are still getting to know each other again. But you knew each other before, right? Before I was born? Yes, Sarah said. We knew each other before you were born. And you liked each other then? Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Yes, we liked each other then. So maybe you'll like each other again, Emma said with the optimism of childhood. Maybe, Sarah said softly. But for now, let's just focus on David getting to know you, okay? Okay, Emma agreed. But I think he likes us both already. After Emma was asleep, Sarah and David sat on the front porch, each lost in their own thoughts. The night was clear and cool, with more stars visible than Sarah had ever seen from the city. She's incredible, David said finally. She is, Sarah agreed. She's always been wise beyond her years. I think it comes from having to grow up faster than most kids. I'm sorry about that, David said quietly. I'm sorry she's had to grow up fast because I wasn't there to help share the load. You couldn't help what you didn't know about, Sarah said, surprising herself with her generosity. But I could have tried harder to find you after that night, David replied. I could have asked more questions when you disappeared from work. I could have made more effort to track you down, instead of just assuming you weren't interested in seeing me again. Sarah considered this. Would it have made a difference if you had found me right after I quit Henderson's? I don't know, David said honestly. I was pretty focused on proving myself to my father and the board at that time. I might have convinced myself that a baby would be a distraction I couldn't afford. At least you're honest about it, Sarah said. I've had 6 months to think about all the ways I might have handled things differently, David said. I've imagined 1,000 different scenarios where I made better choices. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing softly and the rustle of wind through the trees. "What happens now?" Sarah asked finally. "That depends on you," David said. "I meant what I said earlier. I want to be part of Emma's life, but I don't want to destroy the life you've built for her. Tell me what you need, and I'll try to make it work." Sarah thought about her cramped apartment, her 2 jobs, the constant stress of barely making ends meet. Then she thought about Emma's face as she hugged David, the wonder in her eyes as she explored the ranch, the easy way she had accepted this new reality. "I need to know that this isn't just guilt driving your decisions," she said. "I need to know that 6 months from now, when the novelty of being a father has worn off, you're not going to decide it's too complicated and disappear. How can I prove that to you?" David asked. "I don't know if you can," Sarah said honestly. "Trust is to be earned over time. It can't be bought or promised into existence." "Then let me start earning it," David said. "Let me show you that I'm serious about this, about being Emma's father, and about being someone you can depend on." Sarah looked out at the mountains, barely visible in the darkness. "What did you have in mind?" "Stay here for the weekend," David said. "Let me show Emma the ranch. Let her get to know me a little better. Let yourself get to know me too. If, at the end of the weekend, you decide this isn't going to work, I'll drive you back to Millbrook and we'll figure out a different arrangement. And if I decide it could work, then we take it one step at a time," David said. "Maybe Emma spends weekends here sometimes. Maybe you both do. Maybe eventually we talk about more permanent arrangements. But we go at whatever pace feels right. For you and Emma." Sarah felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Everything logical told her to be cautious, to protect herself and Emma from potential disappointment. But everything in her heart told her that Emma deserved the chance to know her father, to experience the security and opportunities that David could provide. "One weekend," she said finally. "We'll stay for the weekend and see how it goes." "Thank you," David said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "But I have conditions," Sarah added quickly. "Name them." "First, this is about Emma, not about us. Whatever happened between us 9 years ago, whatever might happen between us in the future, the focus has to be on what's best for Emma." "Agreed," David said. "Second, I make the decisions about Emma's routine, her bedtime, her rules. You can have input, but I'm still her primary parent. Understood?" "Third, if at any point Emma seems overwhelmed happy with this arrangement, we stop immediately and reassess." "Of course." "And fourth," Sarah said, her voice becoming more firm, "I need complete honesty from you. About your past, about your expectations, about everything. No more surprises. You have my word," David said solemnly. Sarah nodded, feeling like she had just stepped off a cliff without knowing if there was solid ground below. "Okay then. One weekend." As they said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision she'd ever made. Only time would tell. Saturday morning brought unexpected complications that threatened to shatter the fragile peace Sarah had made with staying at the ranch. She woke to the sound of her phone ringing insistently, and when she saw her supervisor's number from Henderson's, her stomach dropped. "Sarah, where the hell are you?" Janet's voice was sharp with irritation. "You missed your entire shift yesterday without calling, and now you're not answering your phone. I've got corporate breathing down my neck about the quarterly reports. And I need you here today." "Janet, I'm so sorry," Sarah began, scrambling to think of an explanation that wouldn't sound completely insane. "There was a family emergency, and I don't care if your grandmother died twice," Janet interrupted. "You know the policy. No call, no show means automatic termination. I'm supposed to fire you right now." Sarah felt her chest tighten with panic. "Please, Janet, I just need a few more days to sort this out. I'll work extra shifts next week. I'll cover holidays, anything you need." Corporate is already asking questions about your productivity numbers, Janet said, her tone slightly less harsh. Look, Sarah, I like you, but I can't keep protecting you from the higher-ups. They want someone who can commit to the schedule without drama. This isn't drama, Sarah protested. It's complicated. Everything's complicated with you lately, Janet sighed. Missing shifts for your kids' doctor appointments, leaving early when the babysitter cancels, calling in sick when your daughter has school events. Maybe retail isn't the right fit for someone in your situation. The words hit Sarah like a slap. My situation? Single mother, no backup, always putting family first, Janet clarified. Look, I admire it, but this is a business. We need reliability. I've been reliable for 3 years, Sarah said, her voice rising, and I appreciate that, but lately. Janet trailed off. Look, take the weekend to think about whether you really want this job. If you're here Monday morning ready to commit, we'll talk. If not, I'll process your termination paperwork. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in shock. She had known her job was precarious, but hearing it laid out so starkly made her realize how close she'd been to losing everything even before David appeared in her life. A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Come in, she called, quickly wiping her eyes. Emma peeked in, already dressed in clothes that Sarah didn't recognize. The jeans were clearly expensive, and the sweater looked like it had never seen the inside of a discount store. David bought me new clothes for riding horses, Emma announced, spinning to show off her outfit. Rosa had them in my size already. Isn't that funny? It's like they knew I was coming. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They had clothes in your size already? Rosa said David told her to buy some things just in case, Emma said innocently. She got me boots too, and a helmet for riding. Want to see? In a minute, sweetheart, Sarah said, her mind racing. Did David say anything else about the clothes? Just that he wanted me to be safe on the horses, Emma replied. He's making pancakes for breakfast. Real ones, not from a box. Rosa showed him how to make them fluffy. After Emma left to go downstairs, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed trying to process this new information. David had bought clothes for Emma before bringing them to the ranch. That suggested a level of premeditation that made her deeply uncomfortable. How long had he been planning this? How much of their encounter on the train had been genuine versus orchestrated? She dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where she found David at the stove flipping pancakes while Emma sat at the kitchen island, chattering about the horses she was going to meet. Good morning, David said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I hope you slept well. We need to talk, Sarah said quietly, nodding toward the living room. Of course, David said, turning off the stove. Emma, can you watch the pancakes for just a minute? Don't touch anything, just make sure they don't burn. I know how to watch pancakes, Emma said with the confidence of a child who had spent many mornings helping her mother cook. In the living room, Sarah crossed her arms and fixed David with a stern look. Emma says you had clothes waiting for her, in her size. David's expression grew guarded. Rosa is very efficient. I asked her to pick up a few things just in case Emma needed them. When did you ask her to do that? Earlier this week, David admitted. So you've been planning this for a while, Sarah said, her voice flat. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. To help an exhausted mother on a train, this was calculated. It wasn't calculated, David protested. It was hopeful. I've been trying to figure out how to approach you for weeks. I asked Rosa to get some clothes because I hoped that eventually Emma might want to visit the ranch. And the train? You've been riding that train for 3 weeks, hoping to run into me. Yes, David said simply. So everything about yesterday was orchestrated. The conversation, my falling asleep on your shoulder, bringing us here. None of it was genuine. David moved closer, his expression intense. Sarah, no. Everything I felt yesterday was genuine. Every conversation we had was real. I may have put myself in a position to meet you, but I couldn't orchestrate your exhaustion, or the way you looked at me, or the way Emma accepted me. But you manipulated the circumstances, Sarah pressed. You created a situation where I was vulnerable, and then took advantage of it. I created an opportunity to talk to you, David corrected. Everything that happened after that was real. Sarah felt her trust in him cracking. How do I know that? How do I know any of this is real, and not just some elaborate scheme to get access to Emma? Because if all I wanted was access to Emma, I could have taken you to court, David said, his voice growing firm. I could have hired lawyers and demanded paternity tests and fought for custody. I could have made your life hell instead of trying to make it better. Maybe that's still your plan, Sarah said. Maybe this is all just to establish that you're a good father before you try to take her away from me. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah saw David's face go pale. Is that really what you think of me? He asked quietly. Do you really think I would try to take Emma away from you? I don't know what to think, Sarah said, feeling tears threatening. I don't know you, David. I thought I did 9 years ago, but I was wrong then. How do I know I'm not wrong now? You don't, David said simply. You have to take a leap of faith, just like I'm asking Emma to do, just like I'm doing with you. What leap of faith are you taking? Sarah asked incredulously. You're rich and powerful. You hold all the cards here. I'm taking the risk that you won't decide I'm not worth the trouble and disappear with Emma again, David said. I'm taking the risk that you'll let me love her, and that maybe someday you'll let me love you too. Love me? Sarah stared at him. David, we barely know each other. I know that you've raised an incredible daughter on your own, David said. I know that you work yourself to exhaustion to provide for her. I know that you put her needs before your own every single day. I know that you're strong and brave and stubborn and beautiful. And I know that I haven't stopped thinking about you since the night we met. That's not love, Sarah said, though her voice had lost some of its edge. That's admiration mixed with guilt and nostalgia. Maybe, David admitted, but it's a start. Before Sarah could respond, Emma came running into the room with tears streaming down her face. The pancakes are burning, she wailed. I was watching them, but then they started smoking, and I didn't know what to do. David immediately moved toward the kitchen, but Sarah was faster. She swept Emma into her arms, checking her for burns, while simultaneously moving to turn off the stove and remove the smoking pan from the heat. Are you hurt? She asked Emma, running her hands over her daughter's arms and face. No, but I ruined breakfast, Emma sobbed. I'm sorry, I was trying to help, but I made it worse. You didn't ruin anything, Sarah said firmly, settling Emma on her hip despite the fact that her daughter was getting too big to be carried. Pancakes can be replaced. You're safe, and that's all that matters. David appeared in the doorway, looking stricken. I'm sorry, I should have stayed with her. I should have known better than to leave her alone with the stove. She's 8, not 3, Sarah said, though her tone was gentler than it had been during their argument. She knows not to touch hot things. This was just an accident. But I'm supposed to keep her safe, David said, running his hands through his hair. What kind of father leaves his daughter alone with a hot stove on her second day of knowing him? Despite her anger about the orchestrated nature of their meeting, Sarah felt a stab of sympathy for David. The kind who's still learning, she said quietly. Emma, tell David what happened. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve and looked at David with serious eyes. I was watching the pancakes like you said, but then I saw a deer outside the window, and I got distracted. When I looked back, there was smoke. I'm sorry I wasn't more careful. You don't need to apologize, David said, kneeling down so he was at Emma's eye level. I'm the one who should apologize. I shouldn't have left you alone in the kitchen. It's okay, Emma said with the quick forgiveness of childhood. "Can we still make more pancakes?" "Of course we can," David said. "But this time, we'll all make them together." As they worked together to clean up the burnt pancakes and start fresh, Sarah found herself watching David carefully. His hands shook slightly as he measured flour, and she realized he was genuinely rattled by the incident. Whatever else he might be, he seemed to truly care about Emma's well-being. "David," Sarah said as they waited for the new batch of pancakes to cook, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay," he said warily. "If I decide this isn't working, if I decide that Emma and I need to go back to our old life, will you respect that decision?" David was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma, who was drawing pictures on a napkin while they waited for breakfast. "Would you let me still be part of Emma's life in some way?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "It would depend on the circumstances." "Then yes," David said finally. "If you decide this isn't working, I'll respect your decision. I won't fight you in court or try to force a relationship that you don't want. But Sarah, I hope you'll give this a real chance before you make that decision. What does a real chance look like to you?" "Time," David said simply. "Time for Emma to get to know me. Time for you to see that I'm serious about being her father. Time for all of us to figure out how to be a family." "We're not a family," Sarah said automatically, but the words felt hollow even as she said them. "We could be," David replied, "if we all wanted enough." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miguel, who knocked on the kitchen door before entering with his usual cheerful demeanor. "Buenos dias," he called out. "I have the horses ready for Emma's first riding lesson, if she's still interested." Emma's face lit up. "Really? We can do it now?" "If your parents say." "It's okay," Miguel said, glancing between Sarah and David. "Can we, Mom?" Emma pleaded. "Please." "Miguel says he has a very gentle horse named Buttercup who loves children." Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "As long as you wear a helmet and do exactly what Miguel tells you," she said. "I will," Emma promised, already moving toward the door. "Finish your breakfast first," Sarah called after her. "I'll eat fast," Emma called back, returning to the table and shoveling pancakes into her mouth with impressive speed. 20 minutes later, they were all standing in the barn, watching Miguel saddle a gentle-looking mare with a patient expression. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement, dressed in her new riding clothes and helmet. "Buttercup is 22 years old," Miguel explained to Emma. "She's been teaching children to ride for 15 years. She knows her job very well." "Will she like me?" Emma asked nervously. "She already likes you," Miguel assured her. "See how her ears are pointed toward you. That means she's interested in making friends." Sarah watched nervously as Miguel helped Emma mount the horse, even though Buttercup stood perfectly still and seemed completely unbothered by the small rider on her back. "Relax, Mom," David said quietly, moving to stand beside her. "Miguel has been teaching children to ride for decades. Emma is in good hands." "I know," Sarah said, though she couldn't help but tense every time Buttercup took a step. "It's just that Emma's never been around horses before. What if she falls?" "Then she'll get back up," David said simply. "Kids are resilient, Sarah, especially kids like Emma who've had to be strong their whole lives." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the insight. "You really have been watching us, haven't you?" "Not in a creepy way," David said quickly. "But yes, I've been trying to understand who Emma is, what she's like, what makes her happy. I want to be the kind of father she needs, not just the kind of father I think I should be." They watched in comfortable silence as Miguel led Emma and Buttercup around the paddock, offering gentle corrections and encouragement. Emma's initial nervousness quickly gave way to delight, and soon she was beaming as she posted with Buttercup's trot. "She's a natural," Miguel called out to them. "Very good balance, very gentle hands. She listens well too." "That's my girl," Sarah said with pride, then caught herself including David in the comment. I mean, I know what you meant, David said with a smile. And you're right, she is remarkable. After the riding lesson, they spent the afternoon exploring the ranch. David showed them the creek where Emma could indeed look for frogs, the vegetable garden where Rosa grew herbs and tomatoes, and the workshop where Miguel repaired equipment and built furniture. Emma was fascinated by everything, asking endless questions and touching everything she was allowed to touch. Sarah found herself relaxing despite her earlier concerns, watching her daughter experience things that had never been available to them before. Mom, look! Emma called out from where she was crouched by the creek. I found a frog. It's tiny and green, and it has the smallest hands I've ever seen. Sarah hurried over to see Emma gently cupping a small tree frog in her palms. Be very gentle, she warned. Frogs have delicate skin. I know, Emma said seriously. David told me that frogs breathe through their skin, so I have to be careful not to hurt it. She looked up at David with admiration. David knows a lot about animals. I had a lot of time to learn when I was growing up here, David explained. My grandfather taught me about all the creatures that live on the ranch. Your grandfather lived here? Emma asked, carefully releasing the frog back into the creek. This was his ranch originally, David said. He built the house and the barn and started raising cattle here 60 years ago. When he died, he left it to me. So this is like a family place, Emma said thoughtfully. Yes, David said, glancing at Sarah. It's a family place. As the sun began to set, they made their way back to the house for dinner. Rosa had left another delicious meal, and they ate by candlelight on the back porch, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. I wish we could stay here forever, Emma said sleepily, leaning against David's arm. It's like living in a fairy tale. Real life isn't a fairy tale, sweetheart, Sarah said gently. But it could be magical sometimes, Emma insisted. Couldn't it? Sometimes, Sarah agreed, catching David's eye across the table. After Emma was in bed, Sarah and David sat on the front porch again, but this time the conversation felt different. The anger and suspicion from the morning had faded into something more complex. I called my supervisor today, Sarah said finally. About missing work yesterday. How did that go? David asked carefully. Not well, Sarah admitted. I'm probably going to lose my job. I'm sorry, David said. That's my fault. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe it was inevitable. I've been barely hanging on there for months. One missed shift was probably all the excuse they needed. What will you do? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Look for another job, I guess. Hope someone will hire me without a reference from Henderson's. You could stay here, David said quietly. You could both stay here. As what? Sarah asked. Your charity case? As my family, David said firmly. As Emma's mother and my, whatever you want to be. Partner, friend, co-parent. Whatever you're comfortable with. I can't just move in with a man I barely know, Sarah protested. You could get to know me, David said. We could take our time, figure things out together. And what happens if it doesn't work out? What happens if we try this, and it ends badly? Emma's already getting attached to you to this place. If I have to take her away from all this, then we'll figure out how to minimize the damage, David said. But Sarah, what if it does work out? What if this is the beginning of something wonderful for all of us? Sarah looked out at the mountains, barely visible in the darkness. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, David said. I'm terrified that I'll mess this up, that I'll say the wrong thing or make the wrong decision and lose both of you before I've really had a chance to know you. Emma loves you already, Sarah said quietly. I can see it in the way she looks at you, the way she trusts you. If you hurt her, I won't, David said firmly. Sarah, I swear to you, I will not hurt her. I will make mistakes, probably. Lots of them, but I will never deliberately hurt her. And me? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to hurt you either, David said. I want to make up for all the years you struggled alone. I want to give you and Emma the life you deserve. I don't need to be rescued, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know, David said. But maybe you deserve to be cherished instead of just surviving. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had wanted to cherish her instead of just needing something from her? I need time, she said finally. How much time? David asked. I don't know. More than a weekend. Less than forever. David smiled at that. That's a start. If we do this, Sarah said slowly, if we try to make this work, there have to be rules. Name them. Emma comes first. Always, in every decision. In every plan, her well-being is the priority. Agreed. No more surprises. No more orchestrated meetings or manipulated circumstances. Complete honesty between us. Absolutely. And we take it slow. No jumping into anything. No making major decisions quickly. We figure this out one day at a time. Whatever pace you're comfortable with, David agreed. Sarah looked at him. In the dim light from the porch lamp, trying to read his expression. And if I decide I want my own place, somewhere Emma and I can live independently while still being part of your life, you'll respect that? If that's what you need, David said, though she could hear the disappointment in his voice. It might be, Sarah said. I've been independent for a long time, David. I might not know how to be part of a couple anymore. Then we'll figure it out together, David said simply. The next morning brought a new development that changed everything. Sarah woke to find a black sedan parked in the driveway and two men in expensive suits sitting in the living room with David, who looked tense and unhappy. What's going on? Sarah asked, immediately alert to potential danger. These are my lawyers, David said grimly. They have some news about Gloria Morrison. Who's Gloria Morrison? Sarah asked, though the name sounded familiar. My former assistant, David reminded her. The one who kept your phone calls from reaching me. One of the lawyers, a stern-looking man with silver hair, cleared his throat. Ms. Morrison has been arrested for embezzlement. During the investigation, we discovered evidence that she may have been involved in more serious crimes. What kind of crimes? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to have a terrible suspicion. Identity theft, fraud, and possibly conspiracy, the second lawyer said. It appears she may have been selling information about Mr. Chun's personal life to business competitors. What does this have to do with me? Sarah asked. The lawyers exchanged glances. Ms. Morrison kept detailed files on several women who claimed to have personal relationships with Mr. Chun. Your file was among them. It appears she may have actively interfered with Mr. Chun's personal life on multiple occasions. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. Interfered how? We're still investigating, the first lawyer said, but it appears she may have forged documents, intercepted communications, and in at least one case, hired private investigators to intimidate women who tried to contact Mr. Chun. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, sinking into a chair. There's more, David said quietly. The phone calls you made to my office? We found recordings of them in Gloria's files. She was planning to use them as evidence that I was irresponsible in my personal life, if she ever needed leverage against me. She recorded my calls? Sarah felt violated and angry. My private conversations about my pregnancy? All of them, David confirmed. Including one where you specifically said you didn't want money, you just wanted me to know about the baby. Sarah buried her face in her hands. This is insane. Why would she do this? Control, the second lawyer said simply. She saw herself as protecting Mr. Chun's interests, but she was really protecting her own position of power. Is she going to prison? Sarah asked. If we can prove even half of what we suspect, yes, the first lawyer said. But Ms. Martinez, we need your cooperation. Would you be willing to testify about your attempts to contact Mr. Chun 9 years ago? Sarah looked at David, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. What would that mean? It would mean going public with Emma's parentage. David said quietly, it would mean reporters and photographers and a lot of attention that you probably don't want. But it would also mean justice, the first lawyer added. And it would clear Mr. Chun's name regarding his treatment of you and Emma. I need to think about this, Sarah said. This affects Emma too, and I won't make a decision about her life without considering all the implications. Of course, David said. Take all the time you need. After the lawyers left, Sarah and David sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while Emma played outside with the barn cats, unaware of the conversation that was reshaping her future. This changes things, Sarah said finally. How so? David asked. It proves that you really didn't know about Emma. It proves that you would have been there if you'd been given the chance. Does that make a difference to you? Sarah considered the question. It makes me less angry, she said honestly. It makes me feel like maybe we really could start fresh, without all the hurt and resentment of the past. And Emma? Emma deserves to know the truth when she's old enough to understand it. She deserves to know that her father didn't abandon her, that he was kept away from her by someone else's manipulation. David reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah, regardless of what you decide about testifying or about Gloria, Morrison or about any of it, I want you to know that these past few days have been the best of my life. Getting to know Emma, getting to know you again, it's everything I didn't know I was missing. For me too, Sarah admitted. As terrifying as this all is, as uncertain as I am about the future, I can't deny that Emma is happier than I've ever seen her. And you? David prompted gently. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years, Sarah said quietly. Like maybe I don't have to carry everything alone anymore. You don't, David said firmly. Whatever you decide about. About our relationship, I'm here for Emma. And I'm here for you too, in whatever capacity you'll allow. I want to try, Sarah said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush. I want to try to make this work. Not just for Emma, but for all of us. David's face lit up with hope. Really? Really, Sarah said, then quickly added, but slowly. And with lots of communication. And with the understanding that we're all learning as we go. I wouldn't want it any other way, David said, squeezing her hand. That evening, as they sat down to dinner as a family for the first time, Emma made an announcement that surprised them both. I've been thinking, she said seriously, and I've decided that I want to keep my name the way it is. Your name? Sarah asked, confused. Emma Martinez, Emma clarified. I know that David is my gaddy now, but Martinez is the name I've always had, and it connects me to you, Mom. I don't want to change it. You don't have to change anything you don't want to change, David assured her. Your name is perfect, exactly the way it is. But maybe someday, Emma continued thoughtfully, if you and Mom get married, we could all have the same name. But for now, I like being Emma Martinez. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at her daughter's wisdom and maturity. That sounds perfect. Sweetheart. Good, Emma said, apparently satisfied with the arrangement. Now can we talk about getting a dog? Because I think this place needs a dog. Sarah and David exchanged glances over Emma's head, and Sarah saw her future reflected in David's eyes. It wouldn't be perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. Together, they would build something new from the ashes of old. Hurt and missed opportunities. We can definitely talk about a dog, David said, winking at Sarah. But first, let's make sure your mom is ready for all the changes we're already making. I'm ready, Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I'm ready for whatever comes next. As they finished dinner and prepared for bed, Sarah realized that sometimes the best journeys began when you fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder and woke up in a completely different life. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that different life turned out to be exactly where you belonged. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.